Good evening. My name is Nick Merja, and this presentation is going to be on the students and society. I'll walk you through the abstract first. Educators K through 16, and when I say K through 16, I mean through their bachelor degree, have reported increased incivility in the classroom. Many argue that the millennial generation is entitled and demands academic achievement despite effort, behavior, or participation. A history of legal precedents awards student rights over institutional order. Examining John Dewey's educational model provides an alternative argument that begins with the Industrial Revolution. Dewey believed youth were no longer afforded the opportunity to connect with society when industry moved out of the neighborhood and into factories. By making occupations the articulating center of education, schools can reconnect society by commonalities and reform relationships. The occupations education model engages students by common ideas, common goals, and gives teachers the opportunity to train them in applicatory social interactions. Confidently dressed in my newly acquired battle dress uniform, or BDU as we called them, I stared at a 50-bed bay, and then I found out that there was such a thing as a dumb question. I said, "Drill Sergeant, who cleans all this?" 14 years later, I see the same entitlement in my classroom. Students toss trash on the floors, knowing someone else will take responsibility for their mess. They refuse to make the smallest effort on assignments and complain when teachers assign them a failing grade. When questioned why their actions fall below standard, students deny the faintest responsibility. In the 1900s, John Dewey noted a disconnect in society, most notably a disconnect between the need for fellow members. The following pages will examine student incivility, possible origins, and the application of the Deweyan philosophy for an explanation and resolution. The entitled generation. Barrett, Rubai Barrett, and Pulowski researched how to prepare graduate school teachers in response to increases of incivility in academic settings. Barrett et al. Referenced several scholars who assign blame to the broadly named entitlement society. In reference to education, an entitled student believes their enrollment entitles them to good grades and a diploma regardless of effort, participation, behavior, or performance. And if these perceived rights are infringed upon, entitled students lash out against anyone who stands in way of their effortless achievement. So where did this all come from? Have students always been like that? To begin, a look at education legal precedents provides an origin story. The origin story of incivility. In 1859, the Vermont Supreme Court determined that most parents would expect and desire that teachers would take care of their children in going to and returning from school. Children should not loiter or seek evil company. At this time, teachers literally acted in loco parentis, which means in place of the parents. But over 125 years since the ruling, students' civil rights have taken precedence over institutional order. The first legal precedence that backed the change was during the Vietnam War in 1969. 3 students were suspended after wearing black armbands to protest the U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War. The suspension was in accordance with a known school policy. The Federal District Court and Court of Appeals upheld the suspensions. However, the Supreme Court overturned the ruling in Tinker v. Des Moines Independent Community School District. In a joint opinion, 4 justices stated, "It can hardly be argued that either students or teachers shed their constitutional rights at the school gate. State-operated schools may not be enclaves for totalitarianism. School officials do not possess absolute authority over their students." The precedence for student rights over institutional order and school civility has been solidified since the 1969 decision. The president of the Massachusetts Teacher Association explained that countless lawsuits have brought about an elaborate disciplinary hearing structure. A lawyer for New York teachers estimated 20 to 40% of teachers face criminal charges each year. So are students acting this way because teachers and administrators are having to hold back from disciplining students because they fear a lawsuit? Is legal precedence to blame for student incivility? John Dewey would argue that it's not. The downside of specialization. Like a bad sci-fi movie, the Industrial Revolution pitted man versus machine. Machines worked tirelessly for no pay and created economies of scale that drove down the prices of every manufactured good. And man compensated by specializing to prove the American worker could not be replaced. Rosenfield explained the profound effects these changes had on the family life. People left rural farms to migrate to the cities for factory work. Fertility and family size declined, as did mortality, especially among infants. The divorce rate rose. Parents who had previously educated their own children informally were for the first time required to send their children to school. In 1899, Dewey gave 3 lectures that were transposed into School versus Society, and he cited that the Industrial Revolution as an international change that overshadowed and controlled all other changes. Virtually everything was affected, so of course school was. According to Dewey, one of the most profound effects was the degradation of societal relationships, beginning at home where industry once took place. Products such as lumber, flour, wool, and metal were purchased within the immediate neighborhood. These shops once welcomed their neighbors for far more than a sale. The customers congregated with mutual respect and appreciation for cooperated contributions. And according to Dewey, the entire manufacturing process was transparent. Every member of the family shared in the work, and the community members had a sense of responsibility to contribute to the world. The societal relationship loss from the Industrial Revolution has changed how we view our responsibility to the world and our fellow man. The role of connecting youth to society is overlooked and undervalued. According to Dewey's interpretations, the results are disrupting our school systems, K through 16. So how does society reconnect after the Industrial Revolution? Can society have its cake and eat it too? Or in other words, can our society have the relationships with fellow man as it did before the Industrial Revolution and benefit from the technological process that it made during the Revolution? Dewey believed the Industrial Revolution generated numerous progressive changes, but the loss of personal responsibility once developed by families was sacrificed when industry moved from neighborhoods to factories. However, Dewey didn't believe that society traded responsibility for technological progress. He believed society had the potential for both. Yet, there is a problem, he said. How shall we retain these advantages and yet introduce to the school something representing the other side of life, occupations which exact personal responsibilities and which train the child in relation to the physical realities of life? It is useless to bemoan the departure of good old days, of children's modesty, reverence, and implicit obedience, if we expect merely by bemoaning and exhortation to bring them back. It is a radical condition that has changed, and only an equally radical change in education suffices. In other words, we can have both. We can have the technological progress, and we can have the relationships in society that we once had. But let's take a look at what problems exist in schools so we understand what we have to change. Social organization is inherent and spontaneous in schools. The problem with schools, as Dewey explained, is a failure to create a medium where conditions of the social spirit are eminently wanting. At first glance, it seems as though inherent social organization is good. However, society is not organized that way. Society is held together by people working on common lines and common spirit and with a reference to common aims. Students cannot learn to organize in school because the elements of commonality and productivity are largely absent. There is an argument to be made that Dewey did not exist in the age of high school sports or clubs, but still organizing over basketball or trying to win at FFA or 4-H is much different than organizing for your industrial needs. Dewey argued the answer was to make occupations the articulating centers of school life. In researching this topic, there are volumes that have been written about Dewey's idea of occupations, most of it in the vocational realm. It is true that the notion of occupation somewhat referred to hands-on learning, but this component is only surface level. DeFalco explained that Dewey's model of occupations touched on social, political, moral, and education issues, and would prize freedom more than docility, initiative more than automatic skill, insight and understanding more than the capacity to recite lessons or execute tasks. In 1916, Dewey published the Manual, Training, and Vocational Education. He explained the social element unites common interest and purposes by developing a free circulation of ideas and experiences. Dewey advocated to teach students to unite for common good of the society in high school, where teachers could still guide and direct them in the training ground for life. Instead of creating competitions in school, where Dewey explained the prevailing atmosphere that for one child to help another in his task has become a school crime, schools would teach students the value of societal relationships. The result, as Dewey stated, within this organization is found the principle. So let's take a look at what this focus on occupation looks like. As far as curriculum goes, the focus on occupation begins with students gathering around common presumptive social roles. So in other words, students will get together based on what they think they're going to do later in life. These roles are vocational and reflect embryonic community life, active with types of occupations that reflect the life of the larger society. But education is not dualistic, meaning that we don't have to choose between vocational training and liberal training. Vocational training is permeated throughout with the spirit of art, history, and science. All subjects are taught with a common goal, a goal chosen by students themselves. And this is vital for students to be eager for experience, because eagerness breeds curiosity. Such curiosity is the only sure guarantee of the acquisition of the primary facts upon which the inference must base itself. Here's the important part, the discipline that we've been talking about. What needs to take place in our school systems in order to change this problem of incivility? First, we have to realize that order is relative to the end goal. Discipline is much different for teachers that require students to absorb a lecture than it is for those seeking to develop a spirit of social cooperation. Dewey in 1938 set a presumptive goal for educators. The educator is responsible for a knowledge of individuals and for a knowledge of subject matter that will enable activities to be selected which lend themselves to social organization, an organization in which all individuals have an opportunity to contribute something, and in which the activities in which all participate are the chief carrier of control. So in other words, the goal that the students have in mind for their activity is what provides the control. The social element elicits a higher level of curiosity and discipline in the form of focus-controlled inhibitions. Dewey believes social influences allowed students to ask for feedback, evaluate, and reflect when surrounded by a willing group. These interactions are what create discipline in the classroom. In 1985, Rich researched Dewey's writings to gather his ideas on discipline. He found from Dewey, when students are free from autocratic and arbitrary constraints, teachers can provide moral training by having students learn and relate to others. In other words, when teachers can see who students really are, when students can be in an atmosphere that is similar to that which they would have in real society away from teachers, we actually get an authentic environment for teachers to teach students how to be successful in real life. In conclusion, I look back on that entitled soldier that I was nearly 12 years ago, who was learning to do his part. I learned through hours of work with the team to complete unfathomable jobs only the military could conceive. I finished each task because it was my role, and I owed those around me my best effort. At the time, it was my contribution to the world. I've continued contributing because of that responsibility. I learned this from being connected to the micro-society that was my squad. As an entitled person, it wasn't because I knew that there was legal precedence that would allow me to act how I wanted. It was that I didn't feel a responsibility to the world and to the people that were around me. Dewey believed that we could instill this sense of responsibility in schools if we focused on occupations as the articulating centers of education. This engages students by common ideas and common goals and gives teachers the opportunity to train them in applicatory social interactions. This is truly a new perspective for students